Why you recording me? Ain't you supposed to be security? Those weren't lyrics. That was Cardi B in a courtroom. This isn't a messy tweet or a tabloid headline. This time, it's real and it's dangerous. The woman who once stood on the Grammy stage with tears in her eyes is now standing trial, not for clout, not for clicks, but for something that could cost her everything. We're talking allegations of scratching, spitting, slurs, and a lawsuit so explosive it could strip her of millions and destroy her career. What happened in that doctor's office back in 2018? Why is the world now asking if Cardi B is a violent star hiding behind a glittery brand? And how did the girl from the Bronx go from robbing men in hotel rooms to potentially watching her entire empire collapse in front of a jury? Let's get into it, because this isn't just about one trial. This is about a pattern, a past, and maybe a fall that no amount of fame can stop. August 25th, 2025. A quiet courthouse in Alhambra, California, suddenly became the stage for one of the most sensational celebrity trials in recent memory. And at the center of it all, Cardi B. Not in the spotlight of an arena, not on the cover of a magazine, but sitting at a defendant's table, staring down accusations that could shatter her empire. The case is Ellis versus Almanzar, a civil assault trial that's been simmering since 2020. The plaintiff, Ammani Ellis, a former security guard, says what should have been a routine day at a Beverly Hills OBGYN's office turned into a nightmare. She claims Cardi, 4 months pregnant with her first child at the time, erupted in a violent outburst that left her scarred both physically and emotionally. According to Ellis, Cardi didn't just lash out with words. She spat insults, hurled racial slurs, clawed her face so deep with 3-inch nails that stitches and plastic surgery were required, and even spat on her. And if that wasn't enough, Ellis says Cardi used her fame to have her fired from the clinic, leaving her without a job. The details are chilling. Imagine walking into work tasked with protecting a high-profile client's privacy, only to walk out cut, humiliated, and unemployed, all because a superstar allegedly couldn't control her temper. Ellis's lawsuit, filed in Los Angeles County Superior Court, wasn't small. She accused Cardi of assault, battery, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Charges that, if the jury believes even a fraction of them, could cost Cardi hundreds of thousands, if not millions. But this isn't just about money. This is about image. Cardi B built her career on raw authenticity, on telling the world she was real no matter the cost. But what happens when that realness turns into rage? When the same persona that made her famous becomes the very thing tearing her down? That's why this trial is so explosive. Because in the eyes of the law, it's not just about what happened that day in 2018. It's about whether Cardi B has a pattern, a dangerous pattern, of turning every conflict into a battlefield. And the scariest part for Cardi? In a civil case, Ellis doesn't have to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. All she has to do is convince the jury that it's more likely than not that Cardi crossed the line. And when you've got a history of public meltdowns, fights, and violent headlines trailing behind you, that bar starts to look a lot easier to clear. Inside that California courtroom, things didn't play out like some serious buttoned-up trial. No, it felt like an episode of reality TV, with Cardi B as the unwilling star. She sat on the stand denying almost everything. No scratches, no spitting, no slurs. The only thing she admitted? Calling Ammani Ellis a B for trying to film her pregnancy. That single slip had the whole room buzzing. But then came the spectacle that turned this trial into a viral moment. Ellis's lawyer demanded Cardi hold up her nails for the jury. Imagine it, a Grammy-winning rapper raising her hands like Exhibit A as strangers studied the length and shape of her manicure to decide if it could have scarred someone's face. It was absurd, but deadly serious at the same time. And if that wasn't surreal enough, the lawyer started grilling her about her wigs. Yesterday you had black hair, today it's blonde. Which one's real? Cardi didn't flinch. They're wigs. The room gasped when the lawyer muttered back, "It's a good wig today." Even the judge looked fed up. But behind the petty exchanges and wig jokes was a dangerous truth. The defense and the prosecution weren't just fighting over facts. They were fighting to shape a narrative. Cardi wanted the jury to see nothing more than a heated argument blown out of proportion. Ellis's team wanted them to see a superstar who snapped and crossed the line into violence. And that's what makes this case so unpredictable, because in the civil trial, the bar isn't as high as criminal court. Ellis doesn't have to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. All she has to do is convince the jury it's more likely than not that Cardi lost control. One small detail, one shaky answer, one slip of the tongue, that could tip the entire case. But here's the real kicker. There's no video evidence. In a world where every meltdown ends up on TikTok, the absence of footage is fueling suspicion on both sides. Did Cardi's team bury the tapes? Or did the cameras simply never catch anything physical? Either way, credibility is everything. Who do you believe? The security guard who says her life was changed forever? Or the superstar, insisting it was nothing but words? And this is where the real danger really lies for Cardi B. Because while this trial is dramatic on its own, it's also unlocking a darker conversation. One about her past, her behavior, and whether this is just the latest chapter in a much bigger pattern. The trial might be the headline today, but for anyone who's followed Cardi B closely, this isn't the first time violence has followed her name. In fact, it's starting to look less like a coincidence and more like a pattern. Back in 2018, long before this OBGYN scandal hit the courtroom, Cardi was caught up in one of her most infamous legal battles. The target, two bartending sisters at Angel's Gentlemen's Club in Queens, New York. Why? Because Cardi suspected one of them was sleeping with her husband, Offset. Prosecutors didn't describe it as a heated argument. They called it a planned attack. Witnesses testified that bottles, chairs, and drinks were hurled across the bar. One of the sisters was left with cuts and bruises. Her head slammed into the counter. 2 weeks later, the second sister says Cardi's crew came back for round 2, this time allegedly coordinated on social media, with cash offers floating around to get the job done. The charges were heavy. 14 counts, including 2 felonies for attempted assault with intent to cause serious physical harm. That wasn't just a scuffle, that was premeditated violence. But instead of facing years behind bars, Cardi walked away with a plea deal in 2022, guilty to third-degree assault and reckless endangerment. The punishment? Just 15 days of community service. And that wasn't the only violent clash making headlines. Just weeks after the strip club scandal, Cardi stepped into another firestorm, the Harper's Bazaar Icons party during New York Fashion Week. That's where the world watched her launch a shoe straight at Nicki Minaj in front of cameras, stylists, and the fashion elite. The fight made global news, and even though no charges stuck, the damage to her reputation was clear. Cardi wasn't just fiery, she was explosive. For fans, these weren't isolated moments. They were part of a timeline, a string of altercations where Cardi's anger spilled into the public eye again and again. Each incident chipped away at her image, painting her not as a boss in control of her empire, but as someone who couldn't control herself when provoked. And this is exactly what makes the current trial so dangerous. Because when the jury hears about Ellis's claims, even if the judge rules Cardi's past off limits, the public is already connecting the dots. And what they see is chilling. A star whose conflicts don't end in words, but in chaos. If the strip club scandal made people question Cardi's temper, her own words made them question something even darker. Because this wasn't gossip. This wasn't a bitter enemy speaking out. This was Cardi B herself, bragging on Instagram Live back in 2016. In the clip, which resurfaced in 2019, Cardi admitted that before fame, she would lure men back to hotel rooms, drug them, and rob them while they were unconscious. She didn't whisper it. She didn't apologize. She said it bluntly, calling it survival. Her exact words, "I did what I had to do to survive." For many fans, the casualness of the confession was more shocking than the crime. Cardi described it like it was just another hustle, another part of the grind. But critics didn't see it that way. They compared her to Bill Cosby, pointing out the same disturbing formula: drugging people who trusted you, leaving them powerless. The only difference was motive, and for critics, that didn't make it any less horrifying. What made it worse? Cardi doubled down. In 2024, when asked about those old confessions, she didn't take them back. She didn't show remorse. Instead, she said she didn't regret it. And under similar circumstances, she'd do it again. Imagine hearing that from one of the world's biggest female rappers. A woman celebrated as a feminist voice, openly saying she had no problem drugging men if that's what survival demanded. The backlash was explosive. Fans split right down the middle. Some defended her, saying she came from the Bronx, from nothing, and did what she had to do to eat. Others blasted her as a hypocrite, pointing out that if a man had made the same confession, his career would have ended instantly. The Me Too era was in full swing, and people were asking, why should Cardi get a pass? The hypocrisy stung even harder because Cardi built her brand on being real, raw, and unfiltered. She was supposed to be the voice of women who had to fight against the odds. But that same authenticity turned into a weapon, exposing behavior that critics called predatory, manipulative, and dangerous. And here's the most damning part. She wasn't exposed by a lawsuit or a tabloid or a rival. She exposed herself. That one live stream etched her words into history forever. Words that now hang over her every time she steps into a courtroom, every time she denies crossing the line. Because if you'll admit to drugging and robbing men without shame, what else are you capable of when the cameras aren't rolling? If you thought Cardi's legal battles stopped at bar fights and shocking confessions, think again. Because the truth is, the lawsuits never stopped coming, and each one piled another brick onto the crumbling wall of her empire. Fast forward to July 2023 in Las Vegas. Cardi was performing at a beach club when a fan tossed a drink at her mid-performance. Most artists would have brushed it off, but Cardi? She launched her microphone straight into the crowd. Video clips went viral in seconds, the mic connecting with someone in the audience. At first, police cleared her, calling it self-defense, but the story didn't end there. By 2025, an Ohio woman filed a lawsuit claiming she was the one struck, accusing Cardi of assault, battery, and negligence. She says she walked away not with the memory of the concert, but with physical and emotional scars. And then there's the infamous war with blogger Tasha K. Back in 2022, Cardi won a massive $4 million defamation lawsuit after Tasha spread false rumors about her on YouTube. You'd think victory would mean peace, but no. The feud only grew nastier. Tasha filed bankruptcy in 2023, claiming she couldn't pay. Cardi's lawyers fired back, accusing her of hiding money overseas and lying about her finances. What should have been closure turned into a long, ugly, very public fight that still bleeds into 2025. But maybe the most damaging of all, the music lawsuits. In August 2025, producers Joshua Fatro and Miguel Aguilar accused Cardi of ripping off their 2021 track Greasy Fry Bread for her 2024 single Enough Miami. And they didn't just want money. They demanded an injunction to block Cardi from performing or streaming the track, and even to strip it from her upcoming album, Am I the Drama? For a superstar trying to mount a comeback, that's a nightmare scenario. Your own album rollout collapsing under copyright claims. One by one, the cases stacked higher. Assault, battery, defamation, copyright theft. It wasn't just one scandal or one bad night. It became a pattern, a storm that followed Cardi everywhere. And here's the brutal truth. Even if she wins every single case, the damage is already done. Because fans don't just remember verdicts. They remember headlines, And Cardi's headlines read like a rap sheet. But what makes it even worse? People are starting to notice a disturbing trend in who she targets. And that sparked a whole new kind of backlash. The lawsuits were damaging enough, but the real blow to Cardi B isn't just in the courtroom, it's in the courts of public opinion. Because when fans started connecting the dots, they saw something that cut deeper than money or legal drama. They saw a pattern, and it was ugly. Over and over again, the women at the center of Cardi's controversies weren't random. They were often Black women, the strip club bartenders, Ammani Ellis, the security guard, even Nicki Minaj, another Black woman at Fashion Week. Time after time, Cardi's conflicts seemed to target women who looked like her, women who should have been her allies in an industry that already sidelines them. That sparked an online firestorm. Critics began asking hard questions. Was this more than bad temper? Was it internalized misogyny? Was it colorism? The toxic idea that lighter skin or proximity to whiteness makes anyone more valuable, while darker women get treated as disposable. For an artist who branded herself as a feminist, a voice for women, a fighter for equality, those accusations hit like a bomb. Because it wasn't just about her actions anymore. It was about her message. Fans who once saw Cardi as the unapologetic queen of realness started wondering if that raw honesty was really just an excuse for toxic, violent behavior, especially toward women. And the timing couldn't have been worse. Social media was relentless. Hashtags questioning her feminism trended on X and TikTok. Old clips of her drugging and robbing confession resurfaced next to stories of her allegedly assaulting women. Memes painted her as the rapper always on trial, instead of the rapper breaking barriers. The backlash wasn't just from strangers either. Even some of her own fans admitted online that they felt conflicted. They loved her music, her story, her rise from nothing, but they couldn't ignore the fact that the woman they admired kept showing up in court accused of hurting people who should have been protected, not attacked. And that's the tragedy of it all. Cardi built her empire on being authentic, on showing the world every flaw, every scar, every ugly truth of her past. But when that authenticity includes violence, colorism, and cruelty toward other women, the very audience that made her famous, it flips into betrayal. Because once the mask cracks, once people stop believing the image, no amount of chart-topping singles can glue it back together. And right now, as Cardi prepares to drop her long-awaited comeback album, the one question hanging in the air is whether fans will even care about the music anymore. Cardi B's story was supposed to be inspirational. A girl from the Bronx who clawed her way out of poverty, turned her hustle into a global brand, and made history as one of the most successful female rappers alive. She was living proof that you could be raw, unfiltered, unapologetically yourself, and still win. But now, that same rawness is eating away at everything she built. From strip club attacks to courtroom confessions, from microphone assaults to never-ending lawsuits, the pattern is undeniable. Each headline chips away at her credibility, each trial drowns out her music, and each scandal makes fans wonder if the Cardi they once rooted for is still there at all. And here's the cruel irony. Just as she gears up to release her most anticipated project in years, an album literally titled Am I the Drama?, the world is asking that exact question and answering with a resounding yes. Instead of celebrating a comeback, she's defending herself against accusations that could cost her millions, her career, and her reputation forever. The bigger tragedy? Cardi once represented possibility. She showed women everywhere that you could rise above your circumstances, that you didn't need to fit the mold to become a star. But when your authenticity turns into violence,
When your truth becomes a weapon against others, the inspiration curdles into something darker. Now, the question isn't just whether Cardi B will beat this trial, it's whether she can ever beat the image she's created for herself. The rapper always on trial, the superstar whose empire is collapsing under the weight of her own actions. And maybe that's the real verdict. Not what a judge or jury decides, but what fans decide every time they hit play or scroll past. Because in the end, music careers aren't destroyed in courtrooms. They're destroyed in the silence that comes when the crowd finally stops cheering. So what do you think? Is this the scandal Cardi B can't recover from? Or will she somehow turn the chaos into yet another comeback?